Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Duraldi. And today we are going to go through our favorite picks in each round, the first 12 in average draft position on Fantasy Pros. We're going to pick one of those guys and so on all the way down through round 8. So the first guy we're going to talk about is in round 1 is Puka Nacua. So I wanted to highlight him specifically because I feel like with the Stafford injury, he's been getting pushed down quite a bit in the receiver rankings, right? Where to the point where I'm starting to see him show up at 7 and sometimes even 8 instead of 4 and 5, where we were seeing him early. So he's currently going 10th on Fantasy Pros overall. And I love that value. Like if you can get a later round pick and Puka is the guy that you're able to take advantage of, I think that's a huge benefit and a great way to start your team. So you see the player card here, right? I mean, he just was so good when he came back from his injury last year. Multiple games over 100 yards. He has that connection with Stafford. He's the number 1 in McVay's offense. He's incredibly efficient in terms of per target and per route run. Like he is just one of the best players that there is at wide receiver. So if you can get him late in the first round, I absolutely think he's worth targeting. Even still, Stafford returned to practice today. So I think that spelled a lot of the concerns. It did for me anyways. And so I'm still continuing to rank him 4th among receivers very confidently. And I think he is absolutely worth taking at the top of that group all the way down to 8 that we talked about being super important.
Really, the only knock on Puka has been, he hasn't been a double-digit touchdown scorer. We see his rookie season, is electric as that was, he still only scored 6. And now, obviously, with the addition of Davante Adams, maybe he takes some red zone targets away. But we know from a talent standpoint that there's no reason that this guy can't have a season where he gets 8 to 10. And if we do see double digits either this year or at any point in his career, we could be looking at a top 2 wide receiver overall. So I think, we're kind of past the fact that he was a 5th round pick. We know he's a complete alpha. So he's definitely someone now that Stafford is back in practice. I think we can be a little bit more confident in, because unlike a lot of these other guys where the injury is not to him directly, it's to his quarterback. So if he was dealing with a hammy or a shoulder or a foot that seems to be plaguing all of these guys right now, maybe the tone would be a little bit different. But I think with him, assuming Stafford continues to stay on the field, is someone that you should continue to hyper focus on. So my guy for round 2 is Drake London. Obviously a complete breakout season last year, finishing as the wide receiver 5. He was 3rd in the NFL in targets at over 9 per game. We obviously know he exploded at the end when we saw that small sample size with Michael Penix. All the underlying metrics were there for Drake London. He was just kind of the victim of atrocious quarterback play. So I think with Michael Penix stepping in, the fact that he is a gunslinger, we're going to see him shell it out a ton, because his ADOT went up with Penix. His target share was like 40%, which we don't necessarily expect to continue. But the fact that Darnell Mooney is a little bit banged up right now kind of bodes well for London's target share. And this guy is, unlike Puka, where he kind of, I don't want to say came out of nowhere, but this guy had the draft capital as the number 8 overall pick, obviously was a complete stud at USC. And when Zach Robinson took over as the offensive coordinator last year, he was a lot more creative with the way that they deployed London. So he was primarily an outside guy for his first couple seasons. And then year 3, we see him in the slot almost 40% of the time. So this is a guy, along with John Robinson, that this team is going to continue to hyper target. And he's someone that, because wide receiver is so deep this year, we see him push down to like pretty much the consensus wide receiver 9. So if you're the type of person, especially in a 3 wide receiver league where you're drafting kind of in the middle or the back half of your drafts, and you start off with, say, like a Brian Thomas Jr. or a CeeDee Lamb, and London makes it back to you in the second round, is someone that I would feel extremely confident starting off drafts with, especially with how deep running back seems to feel like in rounds 3 through 5.
Yeah, and London's an interesting case for me. I feel like after those 8 guys, then I kind of turn my attention away from wide receiver for a little bit. So I start looking towards the running backs and possibly if either of the tight ends have dropped. I guess Kittle to a certain extent, but London goes quite a ways above Kittle. So I do really like London, but I do have him kind of tiered in that group with AJ Brown and Lad McConkey. So I don't mind getting either of those other 2. But obviously you see how he finished last year, and it was like the yards per target, yards per catch were both relatively similar to his first 2 years. So it was just an increase of volume while maintaining his efficiency is really what pushed him up. So if he takes another step forward in efficiency next year, he could be looking at a monster season. So I do really still like Drake London quite a bit. I just think from draft strategy perspective, especially if I get a receiver in round 1, that I might be looking at a different position. by the time he's going off the board. Going down to Kyren Williams now. So this is our 3rd round pick. And, full disclosure, he is at 25. So he is the first pick of round 3. So not somebody you can entirely plan around. But the fact that he's going that late, even still after signing his deal, I think is something that should be rectified. I think he's easily a 2nd round pick. I just think top 10 running back has been basically his default status because of how much volume he gets. And I know his explosive run rates were all down last year, and he didn't do so well in the passing game, even though it was pretty similar in terms of overall numbers. It was just the 5 games missed, in 2023 to have similar numbers. Kind of knocks him down a little bit. So, people maybe think, okay, he's taking a step back. He was a 5th round pick. He wasn't necessarily going to get all the volume because they drafted Jarquez Hunter. I don't know that I buy any of that. I think he's just going to be really good again. He's going to get a ton of volume. Maybe he doesn't have these games you see on his player card where he has 29 carries. Okay, maybe he doesn't do that. Maybe it's more like 22 or 23 in those games. But I still think he's going to work on the goal line. He's an absolute touchdown machine. And, so maybe he loses some 3rd down work. Maybe he loses some late in the game work. 2 and 4 minute drill work. But overall, I expect the volume to still be very good here. So Kyren is somebody I'm still very excited to draft.
Yeah, and it kind of lines up perfectly. If you do have the number 1 pick and you do go with Jamar Chase, you can get Kyren at the 2-3 turn pretty consistently. And it is funny how, after the NFL draft, we get so hyped on these rookies, right? It's like Jarquez Hunter comes in, he's explosive. Oh, Blake Corum, like he's a year 2 guy, he's only going to step forward. And then as soon as the season comes around and it's time to put our money where our mouths are, it's like, okay, maybe Kyren Williams is just extremely safe. And, you see even in PPR, what Sleeper has here, and catching passes is not his calling card, RB7. And of course, one of those was on 12 games. So he just feels like an extremely safe pick. I know we've kind of gone in on a couple Rams, but we know how hyper concentrated that offense is. So he's someone who in the beginning of the offseason, like I said, I was, trying to find reasons to fade, and I was trying to find reasons to fade like Chase Brown as well. And now that we're getting closer, I'm like, okay, maybe these guys are both really good targets. So I've come around on Kyren quite a bit. He's definitely someone that I would feel confident as my RB1, just depending on how I structure my drafts. The next guy up is Ken Walker. Obviously a disappointing last season, finishing as the RB28, but he was RB14 in points per game. To me, it's just like we know that the talent is just not necessarily worthy of a 4th round pick. Now, if he was going consistently in the 3rd round and you say, oh, he's always banged up, he's been kind of dealing with injuries all offseason, like I totally understand that. But this is a guy with this new coaching scheme that comes in. It's, everything that they've been saying since they took over was Kenneth Walker. And they move away from, the air raid Ryan Grubb style to the outside zone run scheme. So I think Walker's ability to catch passes that we saw last year as well was definitely a big boost, because coming out of Michigan State, they were like, oh no, he can't catch passes. It's like, no, Michigan State just doesn't really throw to the running backs, and Seattle didn't necessarily throw it to him a bunch his first 2 years. And I think kind of what gives me a little bit more peace of mind with Ken Walker, especially in round 4, is we know what happens when he goes down and Charbonnet fills in, right? So he's one of the few, or maybe the only guy where if I'm drafting that I'm comfortable drafting his handcuff. Now, I understand if that's not your style and you just are kind of ride or die. And again, it's not like this is a 1st round pick where it's, Christian McCaffrey going to last season. So he's definitely someone where, assuming health and assuming, the wheels don't fall off with Darnold, has the upside to be a top 10 running back. Or I'm just a Kenneth Walker, bro.
The other thing about Walker too, just to highlight the big play potential is just with him in a way that not a lot of other runners have, right? I mean, you'll look up and he'll have 5 carries for 8 yards to start the game. And then, 5 minutes left in the second quarter, he scores a 60-yard touchdown. And it's just like, oh, dude, this is so nice when he does that, So not that he's always going to do that. And you see the yards per carry were pretty bad last year, but overall, it's still all of the touchdowns, right? I mean, he just scores so frequently. So in 11 games to have 8 touchdowns, it's just putting together a healthy season for him, I think. And even if Charbonnet is going to be a little bit more involved than he has been when Walker's been healthy, I still think that Walker, with that big play potential, could be just super good, especially if he keeps the passing down roll and it's more Charbonnet mixing in on running downs. Walker has all the upside in the world. Now, I still have him buried because of the injury concerns. He just hasn't been able to do it. All right. And the next round up is round 5. So you see Tet McMillan on your screen here, but I did want to highlight that Trevion Henderson would have been the pick for this round, but that seems so obvious at this point. He's still going 52nd overall in Fantasy Pros ADP. And it's like, nah, he's going to go at that 3-4 turn. I feel like almost like at the beginning of the 4th round. So I didn't want to have this feature him because I felt like that one was too obvious, but I did want to mention it just because make sure that you're targeting him at this point in the offseason. He is rocketing up draft boards like nobody else currently. Moving over to Tet McMillan now. So I do really like Tet. I've moved him up considerably as the offseason is pushed on. I really just think that the number 1 in this system has the potential to be really good and really high volume. And if he is going to get deep targets down the field type of looks, and he's going to be their main red zone threat because he's so big. You see the 6'5", 212 on the screen right there. I think there's a chance anyways that he has a season reminiscent of Brian Thomas Jr. last year. Maybe not quite so many yards, maybe not quite so much volume. If he gets in that 75 to 80 catch range with, 1,050 to 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns, he's going to be an absolute steal at this point in the draft. Now, if he goes the Marvin Harrison route and they're just sending him down the boundary a lot and they're not making a point to scheme him open, maybe this isn't going to work out so well, but I don't see that happening. Deontay Johnson to start the year was an extremely favorable fantasy player. And then Adam Thielen at the end of last year was very favorable for fantasy. And those guys were starters when they were the number 1s. And so to me, it just feels like if Tet is going to be in that role, that the sky's the limit for him, especially if Bryce Young has taken that step forward. We hope so. And David Canales back with another full year in the system. I think that these guys might be ready to gear up on offense in a way that we haven't seen yet from this team. So I'm in on McMillan. I'm ranked at wide receiver 23, and he's going in Fantasy Pros ADP as wide receiver 27. So I'm very much looking forward to targeting Tet in all of my drafts.
Yeah, no, I'm very in on Tet, and this was a guy that Bryce Young told Dave Canales and the GM, like, hey, you need to go pick this guy. And obviously that was pretty expensive draft capital. They played against each other in high school. And you mentioned perfectly with Deontay Johnson, like Deontay was getting over 9 targets per game. Like, I think this is an offense, like you said, that is just itching to have a number 1. And I think Tet kind of fills that similar big body X receiver that Canales has had with like Mike Evans and DK Metcalf. And I really think the sky is the limit. And, they also have a nice blend, at least for fantasy purposes, of a good offensive line and a pretty bad defense. So this is a team that is going to have to throw a ton, and say what you want about Bryce Young, but in those shootout games and garbage time, he looked like an all-star last year, a Pro Bowler last year. So I think, assuming they continue to build off that, this is someone who I'm continuing to push up. I think I might be a tad higher on him than you are. I think I might have him wide receiver 21. I'll have to double check on that, but someone I'm getting more and more excited about. All right, so next guy up, Travis Hunter. Very exciting, the direction that the Jaguars are hopefully going in, right? They bring in Liam Cohen, they trade up, they give up a haul to take Travis Hunter. And one of the things that really helped me move him up the rankings was when Cohen said, hey, we wanted to play 80% of the time on offense or 80% of the snaps on offense. And so this is a guy that I think, that was kind of the vision initially. And I will say, one of the things that the Fantasy Footballers does every year, which I think is fantastic, is they put out a list of all the vacated targets in the NFL. And the Jags actually have the 4th most in the NFL. They've got 213 vacated targets. Christian Kirk's gone, Evan Ingram's gone, Gabe Davis is gone. So there's a lot of targets that are open, and it's going to be very concentrated on Hunter and obviously Brian Thomas Jr. And this offense overall should be much better orchestrated. And I think with Hunter, it's just, I don't want to be the person that fades just a generational type athlete, right? If I take Hunter and he's used more on defense and he's not as involved as we think, and so be it, right? But if I try to make excuses as to pass on this guy that I've just been watching do nothing but incredible things throughout college, I'm going to be kicking myself a little bit. So I think with him, I understand the concerns, and I do understand where his ADP is. There's definitely going to be some very established players. Maybe it's between he and I don't know, Devontae Smith or Cortland Sutton. And yes, I still have those guys ranked a little bit ahead of Hunter, but depending on how I have structured my team, can see go in different directions.
I've seen quite a bit of discussion on looking forward to this time next year, are we going to be talking about Travis Hunter being the best wide receiver on the Jags over Brian Thomas Jr.? And the fact that we're even having that conversation, I think just highlights the talent here, right? Like, you're drafting the player's talent. He was second overall pick. We haven't seen a wide receiver go that high since like Calvin Johnson, I feel like. And obviously there's the defensive element to it, but even still, I mean, they want to get this guy as many targets as possible in the offense. He's a perfect fit for what they were missing. Just picture Evan Engram and how unbelievably underwhelming he was on a per target basis in the short range, and then put in generational athlete Travis Hunter into that role. And it's just like, feels like one of those things where Lawrence could just start leaning on him in a big way, and they don't even have to scheme him touches. He's just always open. And so, we'll see. Maybe we're getting a little excited there, but there's a reason he's still going in round 6. So, the reservations on defense and the reservations about maybe some of the camp clips that have come out kind of roasting his route running, maybe. But, he's cleaning that all up, and I think he's going to be ready to roll in week 1. So I really like taking Hunter. I do like McMillan a little bit better than Hunter from a fantasy perspective, just because he doesn't have to worry about being behind a very established player already, and especially an established touchdown scorer. But Hunter, I still think, can have all the upside in the world, and we could be looking at him as a second or third round pick at this time next year. Next guy up is our favorite wide receiver to hype up. We have been on the Jakobi Meyers train ever since we started this channel. So, it's just year over year, he just always feels like he's getting drafted well below what he actually produces. And so, basically wherever you can get him, I always feel like he's worth it. So now he's going to round 7. He's at the back end of round 7 too, 82nd overall. So, it's one of those things where you can easily get him in round 7, maybe even try and push it into round 8, if you want to try and play the ADP game. But you see the targets increased last year. He's going to have a better quarterback situation. They didn't really bring in anybody other than Jack Besh. And I know that he hasn't looked the best in camp, and they drafted somebody else who might be fighting for playing time. But I really think that the passing game is going to be concentrated in Myers, Bowers, and Genty. And the reason I put him on here, because I know we've talked about him ad nauseum, but I wanted to highlight the fact that Brock Bowers only played 47% of the snaps in their last preseason game. So I'm sure if you're listening to us that you've probably seen some of that, suggesting that Michael Mayer might steal some snaps or targets from Bowers. Now, how likely that is, I don't think that's likely at all. I wouldn't be moving Bowers down, but my only point is that in snaps, if Bowers isn't going to play 100% of the snaps, it's going to be one of those things where Myers is going to be the absolute focal point on those plays that Bowers isn't out there. So, I would expect the target share to stay about the same. And I do think that 80 catch, 1,000-yard, 4 or 5 touchdowns is like his floor here. So, I'm really hoping that he can do even more this year with a more consistent setup all the way through the year. Doesn't have to have the Davante Adams factor at the beginning and then switching quarterbacks constantly. None of that's going to be a factor for him this year. So I think there's an opportunity here for him to take a major step forward, even from what he has been, which is a top 30 receiver over the last 4 years, but also top 24 over the last 2.
After, Adams went to New York, he averaged 73 yards per game. He also led the league with 0 drops on 87 receptions. So just not enough good things I can say about Myers, just criminally underrated. You mentioned already getting a coaching upgrade, a quarterback upgrade as well. So just again, and from a draft strategy perspective, like if you are playing in these 3 wide receiver leagues, he's someone that can be very, very stable as your wide receiver 3. And so don't necessarily discount that stability because they seem a little bit boring, because as the season goes on and buys come up and injuries come up and everything that goes on in a fantasy season, if you're just plugging him into that 3 hole, you're going to be very happy about that.
Yeah, and just look at his player card. I mean, he had 87, over 1,000 and 4 touchdowns, and he missed 2 games. And this up here, he was playing with Davante. So then after Davante was gone in week 4, I think it was, it's like 10 targets, 9 targets, 11 targets, 15 targets, 11, 10, 9. You get the idea. It's just it was just because he was also playing kind of behind Bowers or 1 in 1A with Bowers doesn't mean that he wasn't getting targeted significantly. Like, this is definitely a guy that can earn targets too. I just can't imagine a situation where he just like fades away out of the offense. That's not going to happen. He is just such a solid NFL player too, on top of the fact that we think he's criminally undervalued for fantasy.
All right, so last guy here, someone who's definitely been moving up my rankings is Ricky Pearsall. I think just for me, the fact that Juwan Jennings just keeps missing time, and whether or not that's because he's actually injured or whether or not that's, contract related, to me, that's just a lot fewer reps with the offense, as well as the opportunity to not be up to game speed and potentially get injured. And with Ricky Pearsall, this is someone who obviously we know what happened last offseason and didn't really get time to develop with the team. We see at the very end when he starts to get playing time, he kind of goes off. Obviously, those were kind of meaningless games for the 49ers, but this is someone who they hyper-targeted in the first round. And I know maybe he was drafted a little bit ahead of where analysts thought he was going to go, but to me, that just shows that was Shanahan's guy. And when you look at the Niners overall, it's, yes, they had a very down season, but you look at the projections for this year, it's they've got the easiest strength of schedule. Their over-under is 10.5 wins. They're projected to be a top 8 scoring offense. And then you look at the opening month of their schedule specifically, it's like, okay, you don't necessarily have to start Pearsall week 1. They're playing Seattle, then they get New Orleans, and then they get Arizona, and then they get Jacksonville. And it's like, if he's going to be the wide receiver 1, now I understand Kittle might lead the team in targets and McCaffrey is going to be heavily focused on, but to me, this is just, I just kind of want that number 1 wide receiver on what should be a very good offense. And should things change and Jennings comes back super healthy and Ayuk after week 6 looks fantastic, so be it. Rosters change over. But I feel like this is someone who, again, can get me off to a hot start should I build my team in a way that's hyper-focused more on running backs or other positions. So I'm just kind of betting on a talent and betting on the system.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm the only person that I've seen that actually has been talking fantasy in a forum like this that is just not in on Ricky Pearsall.
You haven't been in on him at all, which I like.
No, I like that. I just can't get there with him. Like, I get it that he was good in the last 2 games last year, but like you said, they're meaningless games. He didn't do much all year long. It's not like he was forcing the issue, even though he was a first round pick, even though Ayuk wasn't playing that well, even though Ayuk did get hurt. Like, I don't know. And Jennings had a couple games where he popped off, but they also had this offense set up last year without McCaffrey. And so it's just like so many targets are going to go to McCaffrey. And then Kittle also just had like 100 targets or 95 targets last year. And I expect his volume to increase. So like I get he's going to be the wide receiver 1. So if you want to go with that and like be in on him, and maybe I'm going to be wrong on the fact that I just don't think he's going to be super heavily targeted. So, okay, maybe that works out. But the way I'm seeing this is he's going to be the number 3 option going into the year in his best case scenario. And like you said, if Jennings and Ayuk are back by the time you would need him later in the season, and he doesn't continue to beat those guys out, then you're dealing with somebody who's the 5th option and somebody that you're going to be picking in round 8 that is going to be a drop by week 10. Now, does that happen? I don't know. It's just, that's what's playing in my head every time I hear Ricky Pearsall. Is it's just like, dude, I'm going to be sitting there in week 10, continuing just to try and juice the orange. And it's just, there's going to be no squeeze left. So I don't know. I wish I was more in on him. I do, because every time I go to update my rankings, I'm like, oh, number 1 for SF. They should be much better this year. They have such an easy schedule. Brock Purdy looks great. And it's just like, I don't know. He just doesn't excite me in the way that I wish he did. And so for that reason, it's probably going to be a player that I end up with nowhere this year. Maybe I'll pick him up in guillotine or something if he gets cut. But it's going to be a tough sell for me to pick him up this high, because there are a lot of other players that I prefer in this range. All right. And with that, thank you so much for listening. We look forward to talking to you in the next one. Sleepers in the next video.